So hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to this live Q&A at the GLF Bond Digital Conference 2020. This session is hosted by the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance and will cover how innovative finance helps to improve sustainable farming systems. My name is Julio Lubianco, and I'll do my best to get all the questions you type into the Q&A tab. But before that, we'll first give you a brief introduction about the lab's sustainable agriculture stream and the Brazilian program that have developed innovative instruments in the landscape space, along with a short description of some of the financial instruments that the lab has helped design in previous years or is developing in 2020. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available online in the coming days. And now I will turn it over to Tatiana Alves, lab leader for the Brazil program and a senior analyst at the Climate Policy Initiative. Tatiana.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. We'll start flipping the pages now. I'm very pleased to be here. Good morning, good afternoon. Can I see the next slide, please? So when we look at the chart here on the left-hand side of the slide, the greenhouse gas emissions trajectory is going upwards. You can see here the black line going up. And it's important to know that in order to bend this curve down, meaning to go to the shades in blue, green, and yellow that are pointing downwards, we need to mobilize much more private finance and investments for achieving the climate change and the sustainable development goals that we have. They all go hand in hand. For instance, in 2020, this year, we are already on track to be one of the hottest years on record. It's an additional observation that I'm pointing here to underscore the urgent need that we have to channel resources into climate change mitigation and adaptation. Alongside the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all facing right now, that is disrupting food value chains, extreme climate events could also lead to broader threat to nutritional security worldwide, but with the worst impact affecting the poorest and the most vulnerable. On slide 3, we see that based on CPI's 2019 edition of the Global Landscape of Climate Finance, we evidence that there is an average of $579 billion in climate finance flowing annually to climate change mitigation and adaptation around the world. It's the blue line on the bottom that shows the trajectory of climate finance annually. This is actually very good. It's a meaningful increase over previous years. If you notice, the line is going upwards. However, it's still well below what experts believe it is needed to stave off catastrophic impacts from climate change. The IPCC estimates that the investment that is required to achieve the low carbon transition ranges from $1.6 trillion to $3.8 trillion annually between 2016 and 2050. In supply-side energy systems alone to limit the global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees by 2100. Those are the green lines on top. So there is this huge gap here. In addition, the Global Commission on Adaptation estimates that adaptation costs of $180 billion annually are needed to be channeled from 2020 to 2030. So there's a huge gap here that we need to address. So the lab was founded in 2014, and it works to address the existing financial gap to transition the world into a low carbon economy. It's a global public-private sector initiative that aims to drive billions of dollars of private sector investments into climate mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. Next slide. The lab brings over 60 member institutions, including governments, development finance institutions, project developers, banks, philanthropies, and others, in addition to around 300 experts and other institutions that work together to develop the financial instruments that the lab develops with proponents. CPI, the Climate Policy Initiative, serves as the secretariat that convenes these actors and provide analytical supports to the selected ideas that we work with, moving them from concept to pilot-ready investable financial instruments over the course of our process. To date, the lab has helped to develop 41 financial instruments, which have raised over $2 billion for sustainable development projects and initiatives on the ground so far in the developing world. Over $370 million has come actually from lab members that work together with us. And of these 41 instruments, several of them provide useful models for channeling investments into sustainable agricultural models and small-scale farming. Now I will turn over to my colleague, Daniela Chiriac, also senior analyst at CPI, and that leads the sustainable agriculture stream of the lab.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. So as Tatiana emphasized, the lab was built on the realization that there's an urgent need for new financial models that are attractive to the financial sector while addressing the needs of smallholder farmers. Since its inception in 2014, the lab has developed 9 innovative financial instruments that catalyze greater investments into sustainable agriculture. They operate in different geographies and they target smallholder farmers who are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. 2 of them are actually represented in our session today. This year, 3 more financial solutions are under development through the lab. One of them is through the Sustainable Agriculture stream of the lab, which is funded by the International Fund for Agricultural Development. 2 other instruments are developed through the Brazil lab program with the support of GIZ, the German Agency for International Cooperation. Key barriers to investments in smallholder climate resilient agriculture include the high risk associated with sector, smallholders' low bankability, limited access to knowledge and technology, as well as restricted infrastructure and access to markets. So in order to address these barriers, the lab identifies and supports the development of innovative financial solutions. We operate on an annual cycle that starts with an open call for ideas, which is then followed by the selection of instruments by lab members. During 6 months, we continue with the development phase, whereby the ideas are refined and stress tested by the lab secretariat, lab members, and experts in the field. At the end of this phase, the ideas go before the lab members for formal endorsement, after which they move to the implementation phase, including fundraising and running pilots. The lab secretariat continues to provide the lighter touch support in this phase as well. If we can move to the next slide. Throughout the whole lab process, we are guided by 4 main criteria. First of all, the instruments have to be actionable, meaning that they have to have capable implementers, a pathway towards a pilot, and strategies to manage challenges. The next one is the innovative aspect, meaning that the ideas are addressing barriers that have not been addressed by other initiatives in the past, or that they are doing it in a new and improved manner. The catalytic potential means that they can mobilize significant private capital and for a sizable market, and that they have significant environmental and socioeconomic benefits. The financial sustainability, the last criteria, means that the idea have to have a viable path towards fully commercial implementation in the future. Now I turn it over to Karina Pimenta, the initiator of Connexus Impact Fund, currently in development at the lab.
Hello. Just to introduce you to the Connexus Fund. Connexus Fund is a blended finance mechanism created in Brazil and attached to a investment platform composed by also an institute, which is the Connexus Institute, and it aims at catalyzing investment through community-led enterprise and small and middle enterprise that adopt sustainable production systems that keep forests standing and the biomes conserved. We operate mostly in the Amazon, but we cover nationwide. As I said, the fund is associated to this platform, which has an institute whose mission is to promote and activate the ecosystem of community enterprises, looking into different gaps that we see that refrain these organizations from moving further, which are business development, access to market, and impact finance. So the Connexus Fund is the arm for this platform, and it proposes a set of adequate financial products combined with technical assistance. And its innovative approach is to use this instrument, this financial vehicle, to leverage access to public rural credit, which in Brazil is more abundant and it's very subsidized. So we have this policy offering $6 billion annually to agriculture, to small farming agriculture in Brazil, but less than 1% of this goes directly to sustainable production systems that lead to catalytic effects on the climate change. So our goal with this instrument is to leverage this public policy by creating entry points for these organizations that are outside the banking system. So we operate with small grants and a variety of instruments like guarantees and credit recovery that creates a structure minimal in the organization, so they can prepare to have relationships with the banks and access these credits in the long run and in more volume and more adequate to their finance. So we have this target for 2030 to have raised over $1 billion in rural credit for these greening lines, for these greening systems of production. And we operate that through a network of credit enablers that are jointly developed with banks in Brazil. So these credit enablers can help us go to these remote and locally areas and create knowledge that stays in these areas, and creating this enabling environment for credit to be accessed by these organizations over time. So with that, we can have like a scalable solution over time, and also to create the knowledge that stays within the cooperatives and the associations and the small enterprises in order to use credit and finance more sustainably for these organizations. Our products today include direct loans. We do a lot of loans to help these organizations understand how to operate more on the finance field. We do guarantees to raise up to 10 times the volume of resources that we put on the guarantees through this credit, the rural credit. And we do upfront credit recovery services that enable these organizations to have credit score, improve their credit history and relationship with the banking system. In 2019, we did prototypes of these products with 17 cooperatives and small enterprises to test. And now with the support of the lab, we are designing the scalable model and the governance and all that goes in leveraging this the size of the Connexus Fund. I'll turn over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Karina. I think Luis Fernanda will continue now with Director Partner at Caete Investimentos.
Yes, thank you, Daniela. I'd like to thank for CPI for the invitation for this presentation. Good morning, everybody. Actually, it's good morning because I'm calling from Brazil and we're still in the morning here. So I will present you this instrument that's Capora, that's an anchor company that's based on the Social Client Benefit Funds. That's part of the 2018 lab instruments projects. Actually, Capora is an anchor company that promotes the implementation of agro-silvopastoral systems on smallholder farmers. This company operates based on 3 strategic pillars that are technical assistance, financing, and guaranteed purchase of the final products that are produced by the smallholder farmers. We from Capora, we understand that the balance between the production of animal protein and the planting of trees for different purposes, like fruit production, feed for the herd, shade for the animals, or even carbon storage, generates an adequate incentive for the large majority of family farms to have interest in adopting what we call crop, livestock, and forest integration. So it's a strategy that we use to promote, to foster the plantation of trees for different uses. So this balance at the end provides a great result of social and environmental impact, represented by the significant improvement on the farmer's income, as well as a large incorporation of carbon in the soil, among other positive effects. Basically, the production of animal proteins, and we are talking about milk, eggs, pork, beef, and chicken, generates a guaranteed, recurring, and short-term income. So this guarantees the farmer's short-term income, and in this way, the farmer is able to bet on planting trees, which, for example, would produce fruit, but which start to produce effectively and generate any income only after 3 to 4 years after plantation. So the animal protein could support the farmer's income during this period. Furthermore, all fruit production that cannot be sold to the market, and it happens a lot of time, these fruits can be consumed by the animals, generating a process that's like zero waste. This model can be adopted in the Great Tropical Forest of Brazil. It could be adopted in the Amazon rainforest as well as in the Atlantic rainforest, both of which are strongly impacted by deforestation, and which an immense number of family farms live. And in this region, in generally, we have very poor socioeconomic indicators. So it's absolutely important to create an alternative of income generation for these smallholder farms, and consider even that there's a strong relationship between deforestation and poverty. So at the end, generating an opportunity to improve the income of such families, family farmers, it's the best strategy to curb deforestation caused by this social group, while promote much more noble use of the land through the regenerative agriculture practices.
Thank you, Luis Fernando. I'll turn it now over to Sofia Faruqi, who is a manager at the World Resources Institute and is leading the Land Accelerator Bond, an instrument that is currently in development at the lab.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana. It's really great to be with everybody today. So by way of background, the World Resources Institute launched the Land Accelerator in December 2018, when we saw that there were many entrepreneurs in the restoration space, yet no accelerator that met their needs. Now we've had 2 cohorts in Africa so far, which have drawn over 600 applicants. We're also going to be launching cohorts soon in South Asia and Latin America, which have also had a very enthusiastic response from entrepreneurs in those regions. Now, most of the small and medium enterprises, which you'll hear me refer to as SMEs, that participate in the Land Accelerator work in sustainable agriculture with smallholder farmers. And they play an essential role in rural job creation. A couple of data points are average SME in Africa works with around 900 smallholder farmers and has doubled jobs in the year following the Land Accelerator. In our process of working with these entrepreneurs, we've come to see that they face a very systemic financing gap. They tend to fall in the missing middle, where they're too small for institutional investors, and they tend to be too large for microfinance. Also, we've seen that there's a relatively limited investor appetite due to high risk perception. Now, that's where the Land Accelerator bond comes in. We believe we can reduce the risks and deliver a return here by bundling the SMEs that participate in the Land Accelerator into one portfolio, also by leveraging the Land Accelerator platform to deliver financial capacity building for the entrepreneurs, and last but not least, by connecting smallholder farmers to markets. Our vision here is to empower tens of thousands of smallholder farmers to restore their land and also to enable the SMEs to grow faster. We believe the bond will increase appetite within the financial ecosystem for investing in restoration by demonstrating the return potential. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Sean. Sean, do you have any additional comments?
Great, thank you so much, Sophia. Yes, I'm Sean DeWitt, also from the World Resources Institute, working with Sophia on this. Just to briefly mention, we're looking at some potential innovations on how we capitalize the bond as well. One is there's a lot of interest, especially from corporate philanthropy lately, to plant trees, and trying to see if there are ways we can upscale that philanthropy into a debt facility like this. The second is, as Sophia mentioned, part of what we're trying to do here is aggregate or bundle. So the second piece is to try to think of how we can engage in that aggregation space with impact investors that are already looking at this space. And the third is looking at how to de-risk further for commercial capital to consider these kinds of aggregated investments as well. So yeah, lots of innovation all the way from the smallholders up through the how we capitalize a portfolio.
Thank you, Sean. Now I turn to Tomo Kumahira, who has developed the smallholder forestry vehicle within the lab during the 2018 cycle, for the last brief introduction on the instruments that we are presenting today, so we can move to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Julia, for the introductions, and thank you very much for hosting us. My name is Tomo Kumahira at Kumaza. Kumaza is a social enterprise based in Kenya, partnering with thousands of smallholder farmers to plant trees commercially. We established our organization in 2006 as an NGO, and we spent 10 years proving our business model, which is about partnering with thousands of smallholder farmers and do it on a commercial basis. And thus far, we have planted with about 20,000 farmers before. And by now, we are about 50% of Kenya's national commercial planting every year. Although we have proven our business model over the decade of trial and errors, we have one unproven point, which is financing. As everyone knows, trees take years to grow. And during the time, it's really important for someone to take care of the expenses incurring from labor to inputs, and all the time. And that's something that we are trying to solve with this smallholder forestry vehicle, which is a lab instrument. And what it does is twofold. First, it gathers all the smallholder forestry contracts we have as an asset. And we have climate investors invest directly into these projects individually. This is very significant in this industry because there are a lot of investors and entrepreneurs who are interested in planting trees, but most of the climate investors have been focused around getting into more specific project, like a project financing, instead of supporting a lot of venture companies like Kumaza. So the instrument is designed to segregate the risk of planting trees to risk of venture company growing. And this has been our idea for the past 3 years, and we are excited to update that we are on the final phase with the Green Climate Fund on the short list for their next round of proposal selections. And we are looking to raise about $50 million through this first vehicle to both try and de-risk this instrument and also start attracting first pioneering investors for this vehicle. And with our track record, we know that the numbers are about 80% cheaper than competitive plantations. And we hope this is going to be a very significant instrument that can attract more investments to mitigate this $30 billion of wood deficit that African continent has and will have in the coming years.
Thanks, Tomo. Thank you all for the introductions. We move now to the Q&A session. Who is watching us can type your question into the chat box on the right of your screen. And then as start together your first questions, I will turn it over to Sebastian Sobisol, a senior specialist at IFAD, to pose the first question of this session. Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julio. Very happy to be with you, with all of you in this very interesting session. IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, supports the lab since 2 years now. In particular, the work stream on sustainable agriculture, and all the examples you have presented are great, especially in this COVID context, because we know that sustainable agriculture, greener agriculture, supports the development of local value chains. And this is indeed a kind of response for smallholder farmers who can face a shortage of imported food and also of imported inputs. Good examples. Now I will just open the floor to debate with the following question. In your opinion, what is the optimum network of actors in order to channel climate finance to smallholder farmers? We see that we have farmer organization, aggregators. So what is the network of actors to put in place so that all that can function? And then also, what are the best tools in order to ensure a good targeting of the smallholder farmers, and the good tools also to ensure sustainability, especially in terms of de-risking. And then, last but not least, even if it's not financial per se, how do you do in order to properly monitor carbon sequestration? Because we know that investors will be interested also to see that result. It is about climate finance. So the monitoring of carbon sequestration can be a challenge. What are your experience on that? Thank you. Over to who want to respond.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for all these questions. Really good points. I was wondering if our colleagues representing the different instruments would like to jump in. Sophia and Sean, do you think you would like to talk about the actors that could play a positive role in enabling finance to smallholder farmers?
Absolutely. So in terms of actors that play an important role, so I guess the way we've been looking at the financing piece of it is trying to layer it. So for example, what is the role of philanthropy? What is the role of development finance? Or what is the role of private investment? And within private investment, looking further at the impact investors, and then also more traditional lenders. So basically what we've come to realize is, just given the wide range of benefits generated by restoration, some of which are monetizable and some of which are currently not monetized, we essentially see that it has to be a blended finance approach for it to work. So what we're planning right now is having a role for essentially grant capital at the beginning to offset some of the costs of due diligence, which are going to be high when the instrument is at smaller scale. And initially also having potentially some catalytic first loss capital to prove the concept. And then the grants and the first loss are phased out over time. And ultimately it becomes a pretty much a much more fully market-led instrument. Sean, would you like to add to that?
Well, just to say on the constellation of actors, I mean, there is some complexity here, and I think this aggregating function is the key function, and with whom to embed that is an open question for us. And we're, even in designing this bond, a lot of what we were thinking about is, would it make sense for there to be almost a wholesale offer that you could give to an SME to say, listen, we know that you don't want to become a microfinance institution. Here's an institution that can provide those services for you, or does it make sense to really embed those operations within the SME? Tomo, I'm sure you have some good thoughts here from Komaza, because I mean, you're already managing a very complex outgrower scheme. You already have touch points with the smallholders. I don't know how you look at it. Like, where should this capacity be rooted in terms of the financial flows?
Yeah, let me just quickly comment back to you. I think this is a very meaningful question for everyone, and especially the challenge here is that if it's agriculture, cash crop, the cash cycles is pretty short. So it's normally like annual crops. So you plant it one time and then you harvest a few months later, which can be absorbed by both farmers and also operators like Komaza, or like companies like Komaza's. But for forestries and some specific section that takes longer period of time, we tend to believe that it's actually better for the company or organization to absorb the operation risk a little bit, because we don't want farmers to borrow a lot of money to plant trees, for example, and something happened, maybe fire or something happened, and then they lose the whole asset and investment a few years later. That's too big of a loss for farmers to absorb sometimes. So it really depends on the crops, and it really depends on the risk profile of it. But that's something that I think it's important for the operator to bear in mind, because sometimes we tend to give more power to farmers, which is generally great, and empowering is what we do. But at the same time, we have to be cautious about what are the risks that we are imposing on them as a result of the operation.
Great, thank you very much. I think I'll invite Karina if she would like to talk about the question on the risking.
Hi. Well, there are several de-risking strategies. I think each of the instruments here have different approaches to that, and including insurance, including products that are designed to we are experiencing this with the guarantees instruments, which are connected to the credit system. So it is very interesting to know how the risking can be a very holistic approach for both the farmers, who feel more secure being partner to a vehicle, a financial vehicle that is closer to them, develops a relationship and guides them through this, and for the bank, who is also, not doesn't know really the sustainable production systems. They know much more about like crops or cattle ranching, and then when you go to these more complex environments and that keeps forests standing, so their lacks of information creates a risky environment, a more risky environment than it is actually. So this kind of intermediation helps, and creating the guarantees showed for us that maybe many times the resources are required, so you can do this, and the whole both sides of the equation values this intermediation, and many times they go only the technical assistance of intermediation it's for sure creates the environment for that. Of course, this is kind of the risking in terms of lacking of knowledge and asymmetry of information among the actors. And other strategies like insurance, for example, are more complex. We haven't touched on based on this. I don't know if other proponents here have experience with that. But what we experience is like kind of this holistic approaches and this partnership with the small, not exactly the small farmers, but the community, the leaderships of these community-led enterprises who represent the small farmers. So we do this in groups and of people that entails like 10 hundreds of smallholders at once. So I think this kind of arrangements help create scale for access finance in different ways. I'll just stop here.
Thank you, Karina. Now I'm back. I had some connectivity issues, but I'd love now to move on to our audience. And one of the first questions that were posted here is the following, and I think, Dana, you'd be perfect to address it. So the question is the following: I would love to learn about innovative ways or opportunities for using digital technology to connect farmers to finance. Dana, can you take this one?
Sure. Thanks so much, Julio, and thank you to the person who asked the question. I think it's a great one, and we, while working with the lab proponents, we had a number of instruments that did incorporate digital technologies in order to decrease cost or to make services more available to smallholder farmers, or to make them faster. And I'd like to go through a couple of examples. One of them is the blockchain climate risk crop insurance. It's one of the instruments that went through the lab last year, and it's basically a blockchain-based platform that can be used by standardized index crop insurances for smallholder farmers in Africa. What it does is that it helps both the users, so the smallholder farmers, but also the insurers, to decrease the transaction costs, and also because it is linked to a blockchain-based technology, it automatizes the payouts to the policy owners. We have some background noise, and thus it makes the payouts more transparent and faster. The payouts are triggered by the occurrence of extreme weather events like drought or flooding, and so it's not the payout is not linked anymore to a subjective evaluation by the insurance company, and the smallholders can access those payments faster. So that's the insurance policies are estimated to decrease in cost, so to be more affordable for smallholder farmers. Another example is the Climate Smart Lending Platform. It's also an instrument that went through the lab a few years ago, and it is another platform that can be used by all kinds of agri-lenders, like MFIs, microfinance institutions, or banks that work with agriculture, with farmers in general, or even funds, or even agricultural produce aggregators who work with outgrowers schemes, in that it allows them to incorporate some conditionalities in the loan products they provide to smallholder farmers, that mean that smallholder farmers can access loans on the condition that they implement a number of climate smart agriculture practices. What the platform helps to do is monitor the implementation of those practices, and it does it through a pretty simple technology. So it's a mobile-based technology that uses geo-referenced data points, and that can be taken and collected by either the farmer itself, or an extension officer, or a monitoring officer of the financial institution. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. We are getting lots and lots of questions on the on the question tab. So I please ask you all to be brief so we can address the most questions we can during this session. About digital technology, is there anyone else from the participants who want to talk briefly about it? Maybe you, Tomo.
Yeah, of course. I can start by removing myself a little bit from the screen. And this is the applications that we use for farmer management. So we believe that there are a few phases to utilize technology for farmer management or for farmer portfolio management, really. The first step really is about our internal trainings. So we are hiring locally about 350 staff who are from the local community, who are literate but really need professional training to be part of the team. But once they're trained, it's really important for us to make sure they work effectively and efficiently, and we don't have to repeat paperwork and stuff like that. So that's the way we use technology for now, which allows us to improve the data accuracy and operational efficiency. And in the future, we are looking to use similar technology to really connect with farmers one-on-one. So that's going to be the phase 2 of it, which is when farmers have access to smartphones. Right now, we don't have that level of penetration in the rural area. But in a few years period, when we have farmers with smartphones, we can interact directly more, and that will make our operation more efficient and our reachability stronger.
Thanks, Tomo. I'll be moving on here on the list of questions that we are getting. Now I like to turn it over to Tatiana to answer this question. What's the role of crop insurance in adapting to climate positive practice? So a question about insurance here.
Hello, thank you for the question, whoever posted it. So I'm going to be very brief. Well, crop insurance, as we see it, is really an additional financial tool that you can use in order to protect farmers from a number of weather-related events. And those events will become more extreme over time with climate change. So it is a financial instrument that we could support the development of. But that does not work alone in itself. So in all of the instruments that we have worked on, we were implementing financial instruments that were linked to climate smart agriculture. So it's really about the agricultural practices that one is putting in place in order to, over time, adapt to climate change and to the effects of climate change. So crop insurance could be seen as an additional tool to protect farmers while they are rolling out their plans for climate smart agriculture, and a simple way to already protect, income from extreme weather events that could go in parallel with crop insurance would really to diversify production. So when we're talking about small scale farming and the instruments that we have worked on, sustainable agroforestry systems, where you diversify the different crops that you have attached or not to other activities such as, protein chains or working with milk or working with other livestock in addition to different crops, is it a simple way that you can address these issues while you're also using crop insurance.
Thank you, Tatiana, and I turn over to Dana to add a little bit, and I apologize for the neighbor's dog. We are all working from home, so there's some issues that we can't control.
Thanks, Julio. Just to add a little bit of additional information, the crop insurances are also a mechanism that can be, I think, included in different financial instruments like debt funds or bonds in order to de-risk the investments for the investors, because the agriculture sector is perceived and is seen by many investors as being very risky, which is one of the main barriers we see into the way of investments going into agriculture. So by coupling insurance with loan products for smallholder farmers, we can bring an additional de-risking mechanism.
Thank you, Dana. So next question, what are the ways to help smallholder farmers when efforts fail in production and income due to reasons like adverse weather, kind of adverse weather that we are being more used to in the last years, and we may expect to be our new normal in the coming years? Maybe Laranja, can you take this one?
Yeah, yes. Actually, I'd like to take some other questions in this whole reply. Actually, I think that when you diversify the production, I mean, when you have more than one specific product in a smallholder farm, you have a natural protection against all this climate effects, because you are, of course, you are diversified in terms of production. So that's one of the principles of our project. I mean, we mix animal protein with other products that are derived from planted trees, like fruits, for example. And so based on this strategy, we minimize the effects of one specific climate effect. And more than that, I'd like to come back to Tom's comment in the beginning, when very good comment that when he mentioned that sometimes it's difficult to foster the plantation of trees, because you will harvest the fruits in the long term. So that's another strategy why. That's another reason why we adopt this strategy of joining animal production, I mean milk production, eggs, poultry, etc., together with planting trees, because we have a short-term revenue for the smallholder farm based on the animal protein sales. And so this is a strategy that can guarantee that the smallholder farmer will plant the trees and will have an opportunity to wait for harvesting the fruits. And so that's the same strategy by mixing all the trees together with animal protein. We protect against climate effects as well. We protect against a lack of short-term revenue.
Thank you, Laranja. Ask any of you other participants if anyone want to take on insurance to follow up on Laranja's answer. If not, I'll be moving on.
Just very briefly, Julio. I think when designing, I think another consideration is when designing guarantee mechanisms. It's really important to make sure that you try not to just protect the investors, but also protect the smallholders who are risking their livelihoods by adjusting their practices to something else. So yeah, just something to keep in mind.
Thank you very much.
That's what I wanted to point out.
Please, Tatiana, go.
No, this is just what I was trying to point out, Sean, when what you just said. Thank you.
So moving on, next question, I think Dana would be suited for this. What are some of the investment streams available for smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa? Maybe not streams, but opportunities for smallholders, farmers to assess finance. Might be the case of this question, Dana.
Thanks, Julio. I think so I'll give an answer based on my understanding of the question, but it might be the person who asked it might have had something different in mind. So there are some opportunities, and I can talk more about the opportunities that have gone through the lab. And one of them is the one that is represented here today by Sophia and Sean with the Land Accelerator Bond. It is not, so we're talking about the bond, as Sophia explained it, that would provide loans to SMEs, but to SMEs who work with smallholder farmers. So we are not talking about finance that directly flows to farmers, because due to a number of barriers that would increase transaction costs. So we need to aggregate them through a different through a mechanism. So that would be a stream, and the instrument is in the design phase. So hopefully in a year or so, we will have the opportunity to invite investors to put their money into it. Another instrument that could stream investments into the smallholder agriculture sector in sub-Saharan Africa is an instrument that went through the lab last year, the West African Initiative for Climate Smart Agriculture. It's a blended finance fund that was initiated by the ECOWAS Commission, the Economic Community of West African States. It is again in a phase of fundraising, and it's going to start piloting hopefully this year or beginning of next year. And it addresses the gap of finance for smallholder farmers and agribusinesses that work with smallholder farmers. I think there are a number of other instruments that we could talk about, but these are those that just came off the top of my tongue. So happy to provide more information.
Thanks, Dana. So I'd like to remind you all that we have a very broad and diverse audience. So please, when addressing the questions, try to make try to explain some technical terms that we are using, because having in mind that we have this very diverse and broad audience. Thank you all. So now I'll turn to Karina or Tatiana for the next question, which is, what are the efforts to provide technical assistance beyond financing, especially technology inputs, but also storage, processing to maximize harvest opportunities?
Yeah, I can start, but I would like Karina to complement on that as well. So usually when we're talking about smallholders and climate finance to smallholders, we need to keep in mind that usually they will need technical assistance. So in order to provide the resources for them to implement climate smart agriculture, we also need to provide technical assistance. And the technical assistance doesn't go only on the ground, only on techniques that they have to put in place in order to create more resilience of their crops, but also management, teaching them or providing capacity so that they can manage their cash flows, they can manage their finances. So when we are working on these instruments, oftentimes, actually 100% of the time, and we're dealing with smallholders, we are working in financial instruments that are also delivering technical assistance to them. And that technical assistance, sometimes you can even call it technology, because it's just a different way to implement agricultural practices that, you can even call it, providing them with additional technology. Karina, if you want to comment on the storage and, the supply chain, the value chain overall, and how, these different phases could actually provide them with the resources and the capacity to sell their crops.
Sure, Tatiana. Actually, from our perspective, I think the financial access is kind of a consequence of doing all this technical assistance beforehand and over the time they are using it. So it's very combined. I can see one instrument working without the others, as Tatiana highlighted. I think we have been working on the value chain development, looking into more. I think we have to look more into business services that help these organizations organize, and technical assistance beyond the organization itself and the smallholder. I think we should look into more the commercialization networks that provide more scale and more broad access to these organizations, to small farmers to sell their products, and also to have more efficient and lower transaction costs in this part. So I would look into use of technology to help understand the volumes of productions, the control they have in the farm, and along the small pieces of the value chain that are with the community led enterprises or smallholders, or in the lower part of the value chain. And that can also be integrated to upper levels of the value chain with companies that are processing and developing these products on marketing opportunities. And we also have experienced that this is something that we have to evolve, both in using technology and helping the farmers to use this for them. I also think one piece of this, the technical assistance that we often miss, is that how to engage with this off-takers of this, the upper parts of the value chain. So how companies also can be part of this process. If they're buying, if they are the selling point of the products. And that can work in many different ways. So the developing of the outreach to markets, it's very important through the technical assistance. Our experience, and this can be Brazil-wide, but I think it probably refers to other regions also, is that we focus too much on production and organize the production, because this is already a lot of work. To work with smallholders, and then we often forgot or led to the end pieces of our models to work with the commercialization parts. And many times we realize that we go there, we should do things different over the small parts. So for me, technical assistance with part of it should be about commercialization since the beginning, helping them choose the crops, the mix of products, as Laranja mentioned with Caporã. This the diversification of production in the field is very important. So technical assistance, both production wide and commercialization driven, is very important to choose the right species, the right crops, and the right products that you can develop over time. And that makes more sense than to use finance to help deliver these results that you plan together. So I'll just stop there and also emphasize that as the previous question about investment streams, I think when we look at this technical assistance, we should not take them all for granted in terms of, oh, you have to offer this as grant making parts of our instruments. I do think the vehicles should look into that, into investment streams directed to develop the ecosystem. So develop like markets or business solutions based for these parts of the value chain that we miss in offering technical system, making this more professionally available, and that organizations evolve over time to community enterprises evolve over time, understanding that cannot be grant-based, but that can be bought by services for them over time. And so I think the financial instruments have a role also in stimulating and inducing this kind of small enterprises focus on the gaps in the ecosystem that provides better technical.
Thank you, Karina. And I'd like to hear, Sophia, briefly about the experience you have on the Land Accelerator. But also I will join with a second question also addressed to you, Sophia. From the investor perspective, how do you oversee that resources are effectively implemented?
Sure. So quickly on the technical assistance to smallholders, our model with the Land Accelerator is to deliver the technical assistance to the businesses, and then they are then responsible for delivering the technical assistance to the smallholder farmers. What we are going to do this year is we're going to incorporate training in our curriculum that talks about best practices for training farmers, since this is an area that is common to our businesses and where the support would then translate to the farmers. On the question in terms of how do we make sure that resources are effectively being utilized, What we do is, for example, last year for the first time, we incorporated small grants of 3,000 euros each for our entrepreneurs in the Africa cohort. And then we followed up to see how they use the grant and asked them to keep track of the spending. And that then gave us a comprehensive idea that even small sums of money were actually useful to them in growing their business. So at this point, we're really counting on entrepreneurs to self-report on how they're allocating resources. But then also our plan in terms of monitoring is to leverage technology to be able to do third-party monitoring as well. Sean, do you want to comment on the monitoring? Okay, sounds good. Keeping it brief, Julio. Excellent.
Thank you, Sophia. On the investor perspective, I'd like to hear also from Tomo, who has an instrument on the ground already. Tomo.
Yeah, of course. This is also another. I think most of the topics are already addressed by our colleagues and everyone, so I think it's pretty little that I can add. But I think it's important for us to really understand non-financial elements of a project. That's probably the one thing that I can highlight the most, because entrepreneurs are good at something, financiers are good at something, but no one knows about everything that's going to happen in one project. So I would probably add one point that something that we need to take care of really carefully is what are we missing? And there are always something that is in entrepreneurs or financiers' mind that might be a potential risk to the project or something that we should consider additionally. And that's also somewhere that technical assistance and other extra support is particularly beneficial, because it's something that people tend to miss or tend not to look when finalizing the project details.
Thank you, Tomo. I continue with you because we have a very specific question here about your instrument. What 3 species for long-term income were picked by the instrument, and how did you determine the best species? Also, Laranja, I would like you to comment on these too, just after Tomo.
Great. So in terms of the 3 species, our original proposal was listing 2 species. One is Melia polkensi, which is a Kenyan, East African indigenous tree that is growing faster than normal trees. So it still takes 10 years, but 10 years less than other major crops. And the other product is eucalyptus, which is also another prevalent commercial species with a lot of experience and background in this continent, in this region. And the long story short, the way we determine the 3 species are based on complete agroforestry considerations, not our company's business consideration. Our hope is to grow the trees as fast as possible and as sustainable as possible. And it really is an agricultural study of it, not a financial study of it. So it really depends on where you are doing the project that drives the species decisions. And of course, we do not want to disrupt the original environment too. So we have to make sure that trees are planted in a sustainable manner and make sure each species are managed in its best practice that is established by elsewhere already.
Thank you, Tomo. I'd like to have you, Laranja, answering the same thing. What 3 species for long-term income were picked by for Capoeira, and how did you determine the best ones? Hey, Laranja, are you there? If not, Tatiana, could you jump in?
Yeah, hi. For the work that we did with Capoeira, we looked at agroforestry systems to be implemented in smallholders land, and the idea there was to diversify the kinds of species so that you would have continuous revenue stream over time. So we were looking not only in that, but we were also looking to those species that would always have demand for. So you would be looking into products that would have the availability to be sold at any point in time. So we looked into combination of cocoa, also specific kind of wood, or in addition, or as a replacement to that, Brazil nut trees, which are long-term revenue, like they take a long time to grow. And in addition to that, acai trees, so they would have, a particular time frame to be planted and to start being harvested. So that would range from up to a year, and then we would be looking to species like banana trees, where you always have local demand for bananas, and that they grow pretty fast, to 2 to 3 year crops, which could be fulfilled by cocoa or coffee, and then a bit longer ones, acai, which would take 5 to 6 years to start harvesting, and then either wood, which if I'm not wrong was called teca, or Brazil nuts, which are trees that provide shade, but that they also take a long time to grow. And, the idea was to really, diversify in terms of, they being complementary to each other, providing the shade that the other one needs, but also, sort of making a smooth cash flow over time to these smallholders, and also products that would have access to markets.
So thank you, Tatiana. We are approaching the end of this session, but there is still time to one final question. We got some very, very good questions here. We won't be able to address them all, but I encourage you all that are watching us to follow the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance on Twitter and LinkedIn, because we'll be posting there some of the answers to your questions. So now I'm thinking about Sean to take this one. How do you initiate cooperation with smallholder farmers to reach potential lenders? How can smallholders increase their visibility with potential lenders and funding sources? Maybe Sofia or Laranja may also want to jump in.
Great. Thanks so much, Julio. Yeah, I mean, again, here, this is where aggregation is so key. And yeah, just getting organized and cooperating, as it suggests here in the question, really is key, I think, for if you're going beyond microfinance lending. Now, of course, if there is a microfinance provider in the local area, that's fantastic. And that's a great thing to take advantage of. In cases where that is not always the case, yeah, I think it's really important to put the work in on the governance side to think about how to get people together and to speak more loudly with one voice, because it's the nature of capital, right? It likes the larger chunks, and the transaction costs, unless it is a microfinance institution that's kind of made that deal and said, yes, we are going to deal with those kind of transaction costs, it can be quite difficult. I mean, there's some great innovations out there, though. Like, you look at Kiva as one example, where it's a microfinance portal where they literally are taking pictures and profiling individual borrowers and then exposing them to the wider world. So any of us here online could go to Kiva now and support a smallholder farmer. These kind of innovations that harness technology are really, really exciting. But again, the Kiva model relies on a microfinance institution as that aggregator being able to, collect those pictures and those stories and get those pieces together. And I think this is only even more important in climate finance, because, here we have a situation where we have some amazing standards that already exist, certification standards that will allow money to flow, through the carbon markets. But those can be difficult, especially for smaller institutions and certainly for smallholders to wrap their minds around how do I do this? Where do I start? And I think this is where, again, aggregation, either in the form of a portfolio of projects that are seeking to understand reference levels and, leakage and additionality and all the things that you have to understand in order to have carbon finance flow, or engaging with the jurisdictions. We know that the jurisdictional approach here is really, really important, because these projects, if they can dock within the jurisdictions, a lot of that very complicated work up front and in establishing reference levels, and all these things can be leveraging the jurisdiction if that jurisdiction is putting effort into that, and not having every project try to reinvent what ultimately is an expensive, complicated process. So again, I think, aggregation and then reaching out and partnering with the jurisdictions, I think are really key to getting climate finance flowing.
Thank you, Sean. I may offer any of you who speak first the opportunity to address the very final comment of this session. So, okay, then I'll be heading towards the end of it. I thank you all who attended this session. It's been highly productive and resourceful. And I remind all of you that the recording will be available on GLF's and also the lab's website in the coming days. You'll also be able to download the presentation we used during the introduction. Please feel free to share it within your network with those who might benefit of it. I invite you all to visit the lab's website on climatefinancelab.org and sign up for our newsletter. There you'll find our latest news about our instruments, progress, and updated information about the next call for ideas, which will be likely in October. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Know that we will be answering questions there, that question that remain unanswered here. Also, if you have any additional question, please send us an email to lab@cpiclimatefinance.org. I will be sharing now these addresses on the presentation so you can all take your notes. I just realized that I was not sharing this screen. So give me a minute and I will get there. Yes. Can you see it? Yeah. So as the GLF Summit is still on from the next days, I remind you that you can continue the discussion in the Learning Track Community Forum. We'll look forward to connect with you there too. I'd like to thank all of the participants that join us today. I know you are all very busy, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us during this learning track on the GLF Digital Summit. Also, a big thanks to all the team working tireless backstage to help us deliver this session, especially my CPI colleague Rob Kahn and GLF's Ludwig Liach, Gregory McCann, and Vito Gama. See you all.